For most of human history, war had a rhythm to it. A soldier raised his weapon and he fired once. Then he lowered it, and for long, precious seconds he was helpless. He had to bite open a paper cartridge, pour the powder, ram the ball down the barrel, prime the pan, raise the weapon again, and only then could he fire a second time. Even the finest, most disciplined soldier in the world could manage only 3 or 4 shots in a minute, and in the smoke and terror of battle, most managed far fewer. This single stubborn fact shaped the entire art of war for centuries. Because a man with a gun could fire so slowly, armies had to fight in great dense blocks, hundreds and thousands of men, standing shoulder to shoulder, firing together in massed volleys to make up for how slow each individual weapon truly was. Cavalry could charge across open ground because in the time it took to reload, a galloping horse could cover the distance and be upon you. Brave men could rise up out of cover, march forward in long lines under the flags and the drums, and hurl themselves at the enemy, trusting that they could cross the deadly ground before too many guns could be reloaded to stop them. For hundreds of years, courage could still cross a battlefield. A charge could still win a war. And then a single invention took that ancient truth and tore it to pieces. Imagine a weapon that never has to stop. A weapon that does not fire once and fall silent. A weapon that pours out a continuous, unbroken stream of bullets. Dozens, then hundreds every single minute, faster than any human hand could ever move, without pausing, without tiring, without mercy. Imagine that one man behind such a weapon could do the work of 100 riflemen. Imagine what happens to the brave charge, to the massed square, to the galloping cavalry when they run into a wall of lead that simply never ends. That is not imagination. That is exactly what happened. And when it happened, it did not just change a battle. It changed the fundamental nature of war itself and dragged the whole world screaming into a new and terrible age. This is the untold history of the machine gun, the weapon that changed war forever. To understand just how revolutionary the machine gun truly was, we first have to understand the dream that came before it. Because the idea of a rapid-firing weapon is far, far older than the machine that finally achieved it. For as long as there had been guns, soldiers and inventors had dreamed of firing them faster. The problem was always the same. A single barrel could only be loaded and fired so quickly, and then it needed time. So the earliest attempts to solve this were not one clever machine, but simple brute force, the idea of using many barrels at once. These were the volley guns. Inventors would take a cluster of barrels, sometimes a dozen or more, and mount them together on a single frame, all loaded and ready. Pull the trigger and every barrel fired at once, throwing out a devastating hail of shot in a single instant. Some of these strange weapons looked like the pipes of a church organ laid on their sides, and indeed they were sometimes called organ guns. On the battlefield, a well-placed volley gun could tear apart an approaching formation in a heartbeat, but the volley gun had a fatal flaw, the very same flaw that haunted the single musket. After that one glorious, thunderous discharge, it was empty. And reloading a dozen barrels by hand took even longer than reloading one. So the volley gun fired its terrible blast, and then it too fell silent, useless, while the enemy closed in. Then, in the year 1718, an Englishman named James Puckle patented something that pointed toward the future. His invention was a single large gun mounted on a stand fed by a revolving cylinder, much like the cylinder of a revolver but enormous. As each shot was fired, the operator could rotate a fresh, preloaded chamber into place and fire again, far faster than any musketeer could reload. Puckle's gun could reportedly fire several shots a minute at a time when a soldier struggled to manage 3. It was clever, it was ahead of its time, and it hinted at everything that was to come. And yet the world was not ready. The Puckle gun was complicated, expensive, and unreliable, built in an age of hand craftsmanship that could not yet produce its delicate parts to the precision it demanded. It never found real success, and it faded into history as a curiosity. The dream of a gun that could fire and fire and fire without pause remained just that, a dream. What the dream was waiting for was not a single genius. It was an entire new world. It was the coming of the Industrial Revolution, because the machine gun, at its heart, is a machine. And a machine of that complexity, firing under enormous pressure hundreds of times a minute, demands things that the pre-industrial world simply could not provide. It demands metal parts machined to a precise and identical size so that they are interchangeable and fit together perfectly time after time. It demands strong, reliable steel that will not crack under the strain of continuous fire. And above all, it demands one more invention without which no true machine gun could ever exist: the modern, self-contained metallic cartridge. Think for a moment about what the old paper cartridge required. Powder, poured, ball, rammed, pan, primed. Each of those steps had to be done by human hands, and no machine could do them quickly. But the metallic cartridge changed everything. It sealed the bullet, the gunpowder, and the primer that ignites it all together into a single, neat, brass package. Now a weapon no longer needed a human to load powder and balls separately. It only needed to slide one complete cartridge into the chamber, fire it, throw out the empty brass case, and slide in the next. And that, sliding a cartridge in, firing, throwing out the empty, and reloading, that is something a machine can do. Over and over and over again, faster than any human being alive. Everything was now in place. The industrial tools to build it, the steel to survive it, and the cartridge to feed it. All that remained was for someone to put the pieces together. And the first man to do it on a grand scale did so in the middle of the bloodiest war his nation had ever known. His name was Richard Jordan Gatling. Gatling was an American inventor, and here we come to one of the strangest and most haunting ironies in the entire history of weapons. An irony that echoes down through this whole story. Richard Gatling did not set out to build a more efficient way to kill human beings. He believed sincerely that he was building a machine that would save lives. The American Civil War was raging, and Gatling watched, as so many did, in horror at the endless casualty lists. But he noticed something. The vast majority of soldiers dying in that war were not falling to enemy bullets on the battlefield at all. They were dying of disease in the camps, of dysentery, typhoid, and infection, the great invisible killers of 19th century armies. And Gatling reasoned, in a logic that seems almost innocent to us now, that if he could invent a weapon so powerful that one man could do the work of 100, then armies would need far fewer soldiers. Fewer soldiers in the field would mean fewer men dying in the disease-ridden camps. He believed a terrible weapon could, in the end, mean fewer deaths. He would not be the last inventor in this story to believe such a thing, and he would not be the last to be proven horribly wrong. The weapon Gatling patented in the year 1862 was a masterpiece of mechanical ingenuity. It had a cluster of barrels, usually 6, arranged in a circle around a central axis. A gunner turned a hand crank on the side, and as he turned it, the whole cluster of barrels rotated. Gravity fed cartridges down from a hopper or magazine mounted on top. As each barrel came around, it was automatically loaded, fired, and then had its empty case ejected, all in a continuous cycle, so that with every turn of the crank, a stream of bullets poured out of the weapon. And crucially, by spreading the work across multiple rotating barrels, no single barrel overheated too quickly, allowing the gun to keep firing far longer than any single-barreled weapon could endure. The Gatling gun could fire hundreds of rounds a minute, an unthinkable rate for the time. It was a genuine sensation. It saw limited use in the final part of the American Civil War, and afterward it spread across the globe, adopted by armies and navies who understood, even if only dimly, that they were looking at the future. But make no mistake, the Gatling gun, for all its power, was not yet the true machine gun. And the reason is that hand crank, the Gatling gun, did not run itself. A human being had to stand there and turn the handle, and the speed of the weapon depended on the speed and stamina of the man cranking it. Turn too slowly and it merely trickled. Turn frantically and it could jam. It was an enormous leap forward, but it was still, at its core, a hand-powered machine. It was a bridge between the old world and the new. The final revolutionary step, the step that would truly change war forever, was to build a gun that needed no crank, no hopper-fed gravity, no human muscle to drive its mechanism. A gun that would load itself, fire itself, and reload itself, endlessly, powered by nothing but the force of its own shots. A gun that was, in the truest sense, automatic. And the man who built it was one of the most brilliant and most cynical inventors who ever lived. His name was Hiram Maxim. Maxim was, like Gatling, an American by birth, a prolific and gifted inventor who had already worked on everything from electric lighting to countless mechanical devices. But it was a piece of advice, cutting and cruel, that supposedly set him on the path to his most infamous creation. As the story is told, a fellow American said to him something like this: "If you want to make a lot of money, forget about electricity. Invent something that will help these Europeans cut each other's throats with greater facility." Whether or not those exact words were ever spoken, they capture the spirit of what Maxim did next, with chilling precision. He moved to Europe, he set up a workshop in London, and he set his considerable genius to a single problem: how to make a gun fire itself. And Maxim had a brilliant insight. Every time a gun fires, it produces a violent burst of energy. Most of that energy drives the bullet forward, but some of it kicks backward into the shoulder of the shooter. We call it recoil. For every soldier who had ever fired a rifle, that recoil was simply an unpleasant side effect, a punch to the shoulder to be endured. But Maxim looked at that wasted, backward-kicking energy and saw something else entirely. He saw fuel. What if, Maxim reasoned, you could capture the recoil of each shot and use that energy to run the gun? The force of the fired cartridge could be harnessed to push back a mechanism, and that mechanism could do all the work automatically. It could eject the empty brass case, pull a fresh cartridge into the chamber, cock the firing mechanism, and fire again. And the recoil of that next shot would do it all over again. The gun would, in effect, power itself. Each bullet fired would load and fire the next. All the soldier had to do was hold down the trigger and keep it fed with ammunition, and the weapon would fire continuously entirely on its own until the ammunition ran out or the trigger was released. In the year 1884, Hiram Maxim unveiled his creation, and it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Maxim gun was the first true, fully automatic machine gun in history. It had a single barrel, not a cluster. It needed no hand crank, no muscle, no gravity feed. It was fed by a long fabric belt, studded with hundreds of cartridges that was drawn into the weapon automatically as it fired, so that a single continuous belt could feed a continuous storm of bullets. And to solve the terrible problem of heat, for a barrel firing hundreds of rounds a minute grows searingly hot in seconds, Maxim wrapped his barrel in a metal jacket filled with water, so that the water could soak up the heat and keep the gun firing on and on and on. The Maxim gun could fire around 600 rounds every single minute. 600! Let that number settle in your mind. A skilled rifleman of the era could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots in a minute. This one weapon, operated by one or two men, could throw out the firepower of dozens upon dozens of soldiers in an endless, tearing stream for as long as the belt kept feeding and the water kept cooling. Maxim demonstrated his gun across the capitals of Europe, and the great and powerful came to watch in astonishment. He would fire it to cut down trees, the stream of bullets soaring clean through a trunk. He would spell out initials on a target with a burst of fire. Kings, generals, and ministers looked on, and slowly the armies of the world began to understand what they were seeing. They were seeing a machine that could stop an army, but it would take real battles on real ground against real human beings for the full and horrifying meaning of the Maxim gun to become clear. And those first battles happened not in Europe, but in the lands that Europe's empires were busy conquering. In the last decades of the 19th century, the great European powers were carving up vast stretches of Africa and Asia, extending their empires across the globe. And in colonial war after colonial war, small numbers of European soldiers armed with the new machine guns faced enormous armies of local warriors armed with spears, swords, and older firearms. The results were not battles, they were massacres. The pattern became grimly familiar. Brave warriors, often numbering in the thousands, would charge across open ground toward the European positions, exactly as courageous soldiers had done for thousands of years, and the machine guns would open fire. The charging ranks were scythed down in heaps, cut apart before they could ever reach the enemy line, falling in their hundreds and thousands to a handful of guns manned by a handful of men. In one infamous battle in Africa in the year 1898, a British and Egyptian force used Maxim guns and modern rifles to destroy a vast attacking army in a matter of hours, suffering only a tiny fraction of the casualties they inflicted. Tens of thousands of the attackers were killed or wounded. The defenders lost only a few dozen. It was a slaughter so one-sided that it shocked even some of the men who carried it out, and it gave rise to a bitter, famous couplet that captured the cold arithmetic of empire in the machine gun age. A writer of the time summed up the whole grim balance of colonial power in two short lines. Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not. there it was, laid bare. For a few decades, the machine gun gave the industrial empires an almost supernatural advantage over anyone who did not possess it. It helped conquer continents, it helped hold down empires, and it convinced the generals of Europe that the machine gun was a colonial weapon, a tool for mowing down distant enemies who fought in the old way, in massed charges across open ground. What those generals failed to grasp, what almost no one grasped, was a simple and terrible question. What would happen when both sides had the machine gun? What would happen when the massed charge across open ground was not made by spear-wielding warriors, but by their own sons, in uniform, ordered forward against an enemy who possessed exactly the same weapons they did? The answer to that question was coming, and it would be the bloodiest answer in the history of the human race. Before we march into that darkness, let me take just one quick moment. If you are finding this story as gripping as we do, please take a second right now to subscribe to Arsenal of Empires. This channel is devoted entirely to the weapons and the technologies that built and destroyed the great empires of history, the tools that quietly and sometimes violently rewrote the fate of the world. If you are enjoying this journey, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and leave a comment telling us the moment that has struck you the most so far. Was it Gatling who built a killing machine because he believed it would save lives? Or Maxim, who set out quite deliberately to help nations cut each other's throats? Your likes and comments genuinely help a growing channel like this one reach more people who love history. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the perfect moment. Now, let us follow the machine gun into the greatest catastrophe it ever helped create. In the summer of the year 1914, the great powers of Europe, bloated with pride, ambition, and vast modern armies, stumbled into war with one another. It would become known as the First World War, and it would be the first time in history that fully industrialized nations, all armed with machine guns, modern artillery, and every other product of the factory age, turned their full destructive power against one another. The generals who led those armies into battle had been trained in the old school. They believed, most of them, in the offensive, in the great attack, the bold charge, the massed infantry advancing under the flags to break the enemy line and win a swift and glorious victory. They believed that courage, discipline, and the fighting spirit of their soldiers would carry the day, just as it always had. Some of them still imagined the war would be over by Christmas. They had not understood what the machine gun had done to the battlefield. When the great armies collided and neither side could win a quick victory, the soldiers did the only thing they could to survive the storm of bullets and shells. They dug. They dug into the earth, scraping trenches for shelter, and those trenches grew deeper and longer and more elaborate until they stretched, unbroken, for hundreds of miles across the continent, from the sea to the mountains. Two vast lines of men burrowed into the ground, faced each other across a strip of shattered, crater-pocked earth that became known as No Man's Land. And guarding that No Man's Land, dominating it, ruling it utterly, was the machine gun. This was the moment the world truly learned what Maxim's invention meant. To attack, soldiers had to climb up out of their trenches and advance across the open ground toward the enemy line, exactly as soldiers had done for centuries. But now the enemy line bristled with machine guns, each one capable of firing hundreds of rounds a minute, each one able to sweep back and forth across the advancing ranks like a deadly scythe. A single well-placed machine gun protected behind barbed wire and dug into the earth could cover a wide stretch of no man's land and cut down every living thing that tried to cross it. The charge, the ancient, glorious charge that had crossed battlefields for thousands of years, had become a walk into oblivion. Nowhere was this shown more horrifically than on a single day, the first day of a great British offensive in the summer of the year 1916, along a river in France. After days of bombardment that was supposed to destroy the enemy defences, tens of thousands of British soldiers climbed out of their trenches and advanced across no man's land toward the German lines. But the bombardment had not destroyed the deep-dug machine gun positions. As the long lines of men walked forward, the German gunners emerged, set up their weapons, and opened fire. The result was the worst single day in the entire history of the British Army. In that one day, the British suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. Almost 20,000 men died. Whole battalions, thousands strong, were destroyed in minutes. Men were cut down in rows, falling exactly where the machine guns swept. Entire ranks of the young and the brave mown into the mud of no man's land before they had walked more than a few steps. The flower of a generation was scythed away in an afternoon. And this was not a single disaster. It was the pattern of the entire war. Across 4 long years, on front after front, the same terrible logic played out again and again. Attack and be cut down by the machine guns, dig in and defend. The war congealed into a monstrous, grinding deadlock, a slaughterhouse in which millions upon millions of young men were fed into the guns for the gain of a few miles of ruined earth. The machine gun, more than any other weapon, had created this hell. It had made the defensive so overwhelmingly powerful that attack became nearly suicidal, and so the armies simply sat in their trenches and bled one another white year after year. Think of the bitter irony that binds this story together. Richard Gatling had built his gun believing it would shrink armies and save lives. Instead, his descendants helped create a war that consumed lives on a scale no one in human history had ever imagined. The dream of the life-saving weapon had ended in the mud and wire and endless machine gun fire of the Western Front. The old world of war, the world of the cavalry charge, the massed infantry square, the belief that courage alone could carry a position, died in those trenches. It was buried by the machine gun, and out of that catastrophe, desperate men began searching for new ways to break the deadlock, new tactics and new machines that could somehow cross the killing ground the machine gun had created. That desperate search would transform the machine gun yet again and drive it in strange new directions. The heavy machine guns of the First World War, like the Maxim and its many cousins, were tremendously powerful, but they were also enormous heavy beasts. With their water jackets, their sturdy tripods, and their belts of ammunition, they could weigh well over 100 pounds, fully rigged, and they took a team of men to carry, set up, and operate. They were superb for defending a fixed position, for sitting in a trench and sweeping no man's land. But they were almost useless for attacking, for advancing, for moving quickly. An assaulting soldier could not carry such a monster forward under fire. So inventors set out to make the machine gun lighter and to put its power into the hands of the advancing infantrymen. The first great answer was the light machine gun. These were far lighter weapons, often cooled by air rather than heavy water jackets, fed by a magazine or a lighter belt, and designed so that a single soldier or a small team could carry them forward in an attack and provide a moving base of automatic fire. Now a squad of infantry could bring their own storm of bullets with them as they advanced, suppressing the enemy and covering their comrades. The machine gun was beginning to break free of the fixed position and move with the soldier. The second great answer was even more radical: the submachine gun. Inventors reasoned that in the close, savage fighting of the trenches, soldiers did not need the immense range and power of a full rifle cartridge. What they needed was a compact, lightweight weapon that a single man could carry and fire from the hip or the shoulder, spraying a rapid stream of pistol-caliber bullets to clear a trench or a room in a storm of close-range fire. Late in the First World War, the first true submachine guns appeared, and in the decades that followed they would become icons. Light, fast, brutal weapons for close-quarter killing. But the deepest transformation of all was still to come, and it grew out of a single powerful idea about the very nature of the cartridge. The full-power rifle cartridge, designed to kill at ranges of many hundreds or even thousands of yards, was tremendously strong. But military thinkers began to realize a crucial truth. The overwhelming majority of actual combat happened at far closer ranges, usually within a few hundred yards. All that extra power and range in the rifle cartridge was, most of the time, simply wasted, and that excess power came at a cost. It made rifles kick hard, and it made it nearly impossible to build a light, controllable weapon that could fire fully automatically without becoming a wild, unmanageable thing. So what if you designed a new cartridge? An intermediate cartridge, more powerful than a pistol round, but less powerful than a full rifle round. A cartridge tuned for the real ranges of real combat. With such a cartridge, you could build a single weapon that combined the best of everything, accurate like a rifle at practical ranges, but light enough and controllable enough to fire in automatic bursts like a submachine gun. One weapon for the ordinary foot soldier that could do it all. During the Second World War, German engineers brought this idea to life in a weapon often regarded as the first true assault rifle. It fired an intermediate cartridge. It could switch between single, aimed shots and rapid automatic fire, and it pointed the way toward the future of infantry combat. It arrived too late and in too few numbers to save Germany from defeat, but the idea it embodied was unstoppable. And in the years just after that war in the Soviet Union, a wounded former tank crewman named Mikhail Kalashnikov perfected a weapon built around exactly this concept, a rugged, simple, brutally reliable assault rifle that could be produced cheaply by the millions and could function in mud, sand, ice, and filth without failing. Adopted in the year 1947, it would become the most widespread and recognizable firearm ever made, carried into more conflicts, in more corners of the globe, than any other weapon in history. With the assault rifle, the automatic firepower that had once required a huge, water-cooled machine on a tripod was now in the hands of a single, ordinary soldier, part of the standard equipment of infantry the world over. The Second World War also saw the heavy and medium machine guns reach a terrifying peak of their own. German engineers produced a general-purpose machine gun of such ferocious speed that its rate of fire, well over 1,000 rounds a minute, produced a sound unlike any other on the battlefield, a tearing, ripping roar that soldiers described not as individual shots but as a single continuous noise like tearing cloth. Allied troops who faced it gave it grim nicknames, and it earned a fearsome reputation as one of the deadliest infantry weapons of the entire war. In the skies, machine guns and their larger cousins, the automatic cannon, armed the fighter planes and bombers that fought enormous battles in the air. On the ground, heavy machine guns firing massive rounds could tear through light vehicles and aircraft alike, and some of those designs proved so effective that they remain in service all around the world. To this very day, the better part of a century after they were designed. The machine gun had begun as a single monstrous novelty. Now it existed in a whole family of forms. The heavy machine gun, the medium and general-purpose gun, the light machine gun, the submachine gun, and the assault rifle carried by nearly every foot soldier on Earth. Automatic fire, the storm of bullets that Hiram Maxim first unleashed, had become the beating heart of all modern warfare. And in a strange way, the wheel even turned full circle, back to where this story began. In the modern age, engineers returned to Richard Gatling's old idea of multiple rotating barrels, but this time, instead of a human turning a hand crank, they drove those spinning barrels with electric motors. The result was a new generation of rotary machine guns and cannon capable of the almost unimaginable rate of thousands of rounds every single minute, so fast that the individual shots blur into a single, unearthly howl. Mounted on aircraft, helicopters and warships, these weapons are the distant descendants of that hand-cranked gun from the American Civil War, Gatling's dream of endless fire, reborn in the age of jet engines and computers. So let us step back and look at the whole astonishing arc of this story. It begins with a simple, stubborn limitation. The fact that for centuries a soldier could fire only a few shots a minute, and that single fact shaped the entire art of war, demanding massed formations, permitting glorious charges, and allowing courage to still cross a battlefield. It moves through the long dream of firing faster, through the Volley guns and the Puckle Gun and the clever hand-cranked Gatling, built by a man who believed a terrible weapon could save lives. It reaches its true birth with Hiram Maxim, who harnessed the recoil of a gun to make it power itself, and unleashed the first weapon that could truly fire without end. It shows its full horror first in the Colonial Wars, where it mowed down thousands, and then, catastrophically, in the trenches of the First World War, where it helped slaughter a generation and buried the old world of warfare forever. And it evolves again and again into the light machine gun, the submachine gun, and finally the assault rifle in the hands of nearly every soldier alive. For thousands of years, war had a rhythm: fire and reload and wait. Courage could cross the deadly ground in the pause between shots. And then one machine erased the pause. It filled the battlefield with an endless, tearing storm of lead, and in doing so it ended the age of the heroic charge and dragged humanity into the age of industrial slaughter. No amount of courage, no discipline, no fighting spirit could carry a man across ground, swept by a weapon that never stopped firing. The machine gun did not just win battles. It rewrote the rules of war, reshaped the fate of empires, and changed forever what it means for human beings to face one another in combat. From a workshop dreaming of firing faster, to the massacres of empire, to the mud and wire of the Western Front, one grim truth runs through it all: that with the pull of a single trigger, one machine could do the killing of 100 men, and in doing so could bring an entire way of war to an end, That is the untold history of the machine gun, the weapon that changed war forever. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you. That genuinely means a great deal. And if you have not yet subscribed to Arsenal of Empires, please take a moment to subscribe right now, especially if you are not already a subscriber. It truly makes an enormous difference for a growing channel like this one, and it means you will not miss the next chapter in the history of the weapons that shaped our world. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like so more history lovers can discover it, and leave a comment telling us which weapon or which empire you would like us to explore next. From the weapon that ended the age of the charge and opened the age of industrial war, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one, here on Arsenal of Empires.